Across the world's most remote forests and icy frontiers, terrifying legends speak of a towering creature that stalks the dark. Bigfoot, with no known predators, no natural fear, and an almost supernatural silence. This elusive being has left behind claw marks, shredded camps, and missing persons. Locals whisper warnings, while officials offer rational explanations that never quite fit. From a brutal siege on a Russian family home in 2024 to the eerie disappearance of seasoned canoeists in Norway's forested lakes, in this video, we uncover 6 chilling Bigfoot encounters that defy logic and shake belief. The village of Vanavara, nestled deep within the unforgiving Russian taiga, had always been a place where ancient legends whispered through the towering pine forests. Located approximately 900 kilometers east of Novosibirsk, this remote settlement of barely 200 souls existed on the fringe of civilization, where the nearest neighbor might be kilometers away and winter temperatures plummeted to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The area had been inhabited sporadically since the 18th century by fur trappers and loggers, but the harsh conditions and frequent disappearances had kept the population perpetually small. Local folklore spoke of creatures that roamed the endless wilderness, beings that predated human settlement and watched from the shadows of the ancient forest. On January 15, 2024, Dmitry Volkov and his wife Yelena made the fateful decision to visit her ailing mother in the neighboring village of Bigfoot. The journey would take 3 days by snowmobile, leaving their 3 children, 15-year-old Maxim, 12-year-old Svetlana, and 8-year-old Nikolai, alone in their isolated log cabin. The Volkov family had lived in this particular homestead for 7 years, a sturdy structure built by Dmitry's own hands from the timber of the surrounding forest. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to press closer with each passing winter. The children had been left alone before during shorter trips, and Maxim, being the eldest, was considered responsible enough to care for his younger siblings. Dmitry had left them with enough firewood, preserved food, and clear instructions to stay inside after dark. The family's closest neighbors, the Petrovs, lived nearly 4 kilometers away through treacherous forest paths that became impassable during severe weather. On the night of January 15th, young Nikolai was the first to hear the sounds. He reported to his brother that something large was moving around outside, circling their cabin with deliberate, measured steps. Maxim initially dismissed these concerns as the boy's imagination, but as the evening progressed, all 3 children began to hear the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls in the snow surrounding their home. The sounds were unlike anything they had encountered before, not the familiar padding of wolves or the lumber of bears, but something that seemed to walk upright with a stride far longer than any human could manage. The footsteps would stop periodically, followed by periods of unsettling silence, before resuming their methodical circuit around the cabin. Svetlana later told investigators that the sounds reminded her of her father's footsteps, but magnified and slowed, as if something enormous was deliberately mimicking human movement. As the night deepened, the mysterious presence became increasingly aggressive in its behavior. The children huddled together in the main room as heavy thuds began striking the exterior walls of their home. The impacts were so forceful that the entire structure shook, causing hanging pots and pans to rattle ominously. Maxim attempted to peer through one of the frost-covered windows, but could see nothing beyond the darkness and swirling snow. The siege intensified throughout the night. Deep scratching sounds scraped against the wooden walls, as if massive claws were testing the strength of the logs. The children could hear their stored firewood being scattered and thrown about the yard, creating loud crashes that echoed through the forest. Most terrifying of all were the occasional low, guttural vocalizations that seemed to emanate from directly outside their door. sounds that were neither fully human nor entirely animal. By dawn, the attacks had ceased, leaving behind an eerie silence that somehow felt more threatening than the previous night's chaos. When Dmitri and Yelena returned on January 19th, they discovered a scene that would haunt them forever. Their cabin's exterior bore deep gouges in the wood, scratches that extended impossibly high up the walls, nearly 3 meters from the ground. Several windows had been shattered from the outside, with glass scattered across the interior floors. Inside, they found their 3 children lifeless, bearing unusual bruises and wounds that local medical officials struggled to explain. The injuries were inconsistent with typical animal attacks, showing a pattern of blunt force trauma mixed with strange puncture marks. The furniture had been violently overturned, suggesting a fierce struggle had taken place within the confines of their home. Outside in the snow, investigators discovered a trail of massive footprints that circled the cabin repeatedly, creating a pattern that suggested the creature had methodically stalked the property for hours. The prints measured nearly 50 centimeters in length and showed clear impressions of what appeared to be oversized toes. Most puzzling was the discovery that their well, which had been full just days before, was completely drained, with no apparent explanation for where the water had gone. Local authorities attributed the tragedy to a bear attack, despite the inconsistencies in the evidence. The official report cited the unusual behavior as possibly resulting from a diseased animal, though no bear tracks were found at the scene. The case was quickly closed, with officials eager to avoid the panic that might result from acknowledging an unknown threat in the region. The surviving villagers, however, remained convinced that something far more sinister than a bear had claimed the Volkov children. Elder residents spoke in hushed tones about ancient legends of forest guardians that had turned malevolent, creatures that had watched human encroachment into their domain for too long. The Volkov cabin was abandoned and eventually reclaimed by the forest, becoming another cautionary tale whispered around winter fires throughout the remote villages of the taiga. The Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana had long been a sanctuary for experienced hunters seeking solitude and challenging terrain. The dense forests that blanketed these rugged peaks were experiencing an unusually quiet hunting season. The area, located roughly 60 kilometers southwest of Missoula, had been a traditional hunting ground for generations of local families. Native American tribes had once considered these mountains sacred, believing them to be inhabited by powerful spirits that demanded respect from all who entered their domain. The dense canopy of Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and western larch created a cathedral-like atmosphere where sunlight filtered through in scattered beams, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. 2 seasoned hunters, Cornelius Blackwood and Thaddeus Grimsby, had been planning their annual hunting expedition for months. Both men were in their 50s, with over 3 decades of hunting experience between them. Cornelius, a retired logger from Kalispell, was known for his exceptional tracking skills and intimate knowledge of Montana's wilderness. Thaddeus, a former park ranger turned hunting guide, possessed an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior and forest signs. They had hunted together for 15 years, developing an unspoken communication that made them highly effective partners in the field. The 2 men had established their base camp in a small clearing approximately 8 kilometers from the nearest Forest Service road. Their chosen location offered strategic advantages: fresh water from a nearby mountain stream, natural windbreaks formed by towering evergreens, and easy access to game trails that crisscrossed the surrounding ridges. They had been in the wilderness for 4 days, with moderate success tracking deer and elk sign, when they encountered something that would fundamentally alter their perception of what inhabited these ancient mountains. On the evening of October 12th, 2004, as dusk began to settle over the forest canopy, Cornelius and Thaddeus were returning to camp along a familiar game trail. The air was crisp and still, carrying the earthy scents of decomposing leaves and pine resin. Thaddeus was leading, about 10 meters ahead, when he suddenly stopped and raised his hand in the universal signal for silence. Both hunters froze, their senses heightened by years of wilderness experience. Between the massive trunks of two ancient pines, approximately 50 meters away, stood a silhouette unlike anything either man had encountered in their combined decades of forest experience. The figure was enormous, easily standing over 2.5 meters tall, with impossibly broad shoulders that seemed to span the width of the narrow gap between the trees. What struck both hunters most profoundly was the creature's complete stillness. It stood motionless as a statue, yet radiated an unmistakable sense of awareness and intelligence. Cornelius later reported that the being's eyes seemed to glow with an amber luminescence in the gathering darkness, reflecting what little light remained, filtering through the forest canopy. The creature did not exhibit the typical behavior of any known wildlife. There was no startled flight response, no aggressive posturing, simply an unnerving, calm observation that suggested the hunters were being evaluated rather than accidentally encountered. Thaddeus, operating on pure instinct, developed through years of dealing with dangerous wildlife encounters, slowly raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air above the creature's head. The report echoed through the forest like thunder, sending small birds erupting from nearby branches in a cacophony of alarmed calls. However, the massive figure displayed no reaction to the gunshot. It simply melted back into the shadows between the trees with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something of its apparent size and bulk. Both hunters stood frozen for several minutes, straining their ears for any sound of movement through the underbrush. The forest had fallen into an unnatural silence following the gunshot, as if every living creature was holding its breath. Finally, they cautiously approached the area where the figure had been standing, but found no trace of its presence, no footprints in the soft forest floor, no broken vegetation, no physical evidence that anything had been there at all. When they returned to their camp, as full darkness settled over the mountains, both men discovered that their carefully organized campsite had been systematically disturbed. Tree branches had been broken and arranged in peculiar geometric patterns around their tent, creating what appeared to be deliberate symbols or markers. The arrangements were far too complex and intentional to be the result of random animal activity or natural causes. Most unsettling were the deep claw marks they found gouged into the bark of several large trees surrounding their campsite. The scratches extended nearly 4 meters up the trunks, far higher than any bear could reach, even standing on its hind legs. The marks themselves were unlike anything in their extensive experience, broader and deeper than bear claws, with a spacing that suggested digits of enormous proportions. Despite thorough examination of the ground around their camp, neither hunter could locate any footprints or tracks that might explain the presence of whatever had visited their site. The forest floor showed heavy depressions in several areas, suggesting something of considerable weight had moved through, but the impressions were too vague and disturbed to provide clear evidence. When they reported their encounter to local forest rangers the following day, officials suggested they had likely encountered a large black bear exhibiting unusual behavior, possibly due to the approaching winter season. However, both Cornelius and Thaddeus firmly disagreed with this assessment, insisting that no bear could stand as tall as what they had observed, nor disappear so completely and silently into the forest. The two hunters departed the area earlier than planned, both admitting privately that they felt continuously watched during their remaining time in the mountains. They never returned to hunt in that particular region again. convinced that something ancient and intelligent continued to observe human activities from the depths of Montana's wilderness. The remote Scottish Highlands of Inverness Shire harbored countless secrets within their mist-shrouded lochs and ancient glens. On July 23, 2017, a particular loch nestled deep within the Cairngorms held a mystery that would puzzle authorities for months. This unnamed body of water, roughly 12 kilometers southeast of Aviemore, stretched nearly 3 kilometers in length and was renowned among local fishing enthusiasts for its abundant trout and the ethereal beauty of its pristine surroundings. The loch had been formed during the last ice age, carved by glacial movement that left behind a deep, dark basin surrounded by towering granite cliffs and dense pine forests that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. A group of 4 experienced anglers from Edinburgh had planned their annual fishing expedition to this remote location for over a year. The group consisted of Barnabas Wickshire, a retired solicitor with 40 years of fishing experience, Montgomery Ashford, a university professor of marine biology, Percival Grimwald, a successful businessman who owned several sporting goods stores, and Reginald Thornsbury, a former military officer turned outdoor enthusiast. All 4 men were seasoned outdoorsmen who had fished throughout Scotland's most challenging waters, but none had previously visited this particular loch due to its reputation for unpredictable weather and difficult access. The only practical way to reach the prime fishing areas was by hiring Hamish MacLeod, a local ferryman who had been operating his small wooden boat on the loch for over 2 decades. MacLeod was a solitary figure in his late 50s, known throughout the region for his intimate knowledge of the loch's hidden depths and his uncanny ability to locate the best fishing spots regardless of weather conditions. He lived alone in a small cottage on the loch's eastern shore, maintaining his boat and serving the occasional groups of anglers who sought his services. On the evening of July 24th, the 4 anglers hired MacLeod to transport them to a particularly promising fishing area near the loch's northern shore. The weather had been perfect throughout the day. Clear skies, minimal wind, and excellent visibility across the water's surface. MacLeod appeared in good spirits as he loaded their equipment into his sturdy boat, sharing local knowledge about the best techniques for the loch's elusive trout. As the boat reached the center of the loch, approximately halfway to their destination, MacLeod's demeanor underwent a dramatic transformation. He suddenly ceased his steady rowing and sat motionless, his eyes fixed intently on the dark water surrounding their vessel. The 4 anglers noticed that the ferryman seemed to be listening to something they could not hear. His head tilted slightly, as if straining to catch whispered words carried on the evening breeze. Without warning or explanation, MacLeod stood up in the boat with surprising agility and dove headfirst into the loch's dark waters. The sudden movement caused the small vessel to rock violently, nearly capsizing with the 4 passengers still aboard. Reginald Thornsbury, drawing upon his military training, immediately took control of the situation and managed to stabilize the boat, while the other 3 men scanned the water's surface for any sign of the missing ferryman. The loch's surface remained eerily calm, showing no indication that anyone had recently disturbed its depths. Despite their combined efforts to locate MacLeod, including shouting his name and searching the immediate area, the 4 anglers found no trace of the ferryman. The water was so dark and deep that even objects just below the surface were completely invisible from above. Faced with the growing darkness and their precarious situation, the 4 men were forced to navigate the unfamiliar boat back to shore using basic rowing skills and what little knowledge they had gained from observing MacLeod's techniques. They reached the eastern shore after nearly 2 hours of difficult rowing, immediately contacted local authorities and reported the ferryman's disappearance. A comprehensive search and rescue operation was launched the following morning, involving professional divers, sonar equipment, and multiple boats. Despite extensive efforts covering the entire loch, no trace of Hamish MacLeod was ever recovered. The water's depth in the central area exceeded 40 meters, and the rocky bottom was littered with centuries of accumulated debris that made thorough searching extremely challenging. 3 weeks after the incident, Percival Grimwald was hiking along the loch's perimeter when he made a disturbing discovery. High in the branches of an ancient oak tree, approximately 4 meters above ground level, hung a leather pouch that local authorities later confirmed belonged to the missing ferryman. The pouch had been carefully wrapped in fresh moss and tied securely to the branch with what forensic examination revealed to be human hair of various colors and ages. The circumstances surrounding how the pouch reached such an inaccessible location remained unexplained. The tree's trunk was smooth and showed no signs of recent climbing, and there were no other trees or structures nearby that could have provided access to that particular branch. Most puzzling was the condition of the pouch itself. Despite being exposed to highland weather for 3 weeks, it appeared to have been recently placed and carefully protected from the elements. Around the base of the tree, investigators discovered a series of enormous wet footprints pressed deeply into the muddy ground. The prints formed a complete circle around the oak's trunk, as if something had repeatedly walked around the tree while carrying considerable weight. The footprints measured nearly 45 centimeters in length and showed clear impressions of individual toes, but their size and shape matched no known animal species native to the Scottish Highlands. Official reports classified Hamish MacLeod's disappearance as a probable drowning, suggesting that he may have suffered a medical emergency that caused him to fall overboard. However, the 4 surviving witnesses maintained that the ferryman had deliberately entered the water, and local residents expressed skepticism about the official explanation. The loch's reputation among locals grew even more ominous following the incident. Elderly residents began sharing stories about ancient guardians that dwelt beneath the dark waters, beings that occasionally claimed those who showed insufficient respect for the loch's sacred nature. Several longtime residents mentioned that MacLeod had recently expressed concerns about changes he had observed in the loch's behavior, including unusual sounds emanating from deep water and the appearance of strange disturbances on calm evenings. The 4 Edinburgh anglers never returned to fish in the Scottish Highlands, each man privately convinced that they had witnessed something far beyond normal human experience in those dark, mysterious waters. The coastal mountains of Oregon had always attracted outdoor enthusiasts, seeking refuge from urban life in the pristine wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. On October 18, 2021, a small recreational vehicle park nestled in a secluded valley approximately 40 kilometers east of Newport provided the perfect base camp for families wanting to experience nature without sacrificing basic comforts. The facility, established in the early 1990s, consisted of 12 camping spots carved from dense forest, each equipped with electrical hookups and basic amenities. Towering Douglas firs and Sitka spruces created a natural canopy that filtered sunlight during the day and cast deep shadows after dark. The Pemberton family had chosen this remote location for their annual camping expedition. Bartholomew Pemberton, a middle-aged accountant from Portland, had brought his wife Cordelia and their 2 teenage children, Maximilian and Prudence, for what they anticipated would be a peaceful retreat from city life. The family had been camping together for over a decade, but this was their first visit to this particular location, which had been recommended by friends who praised its pristine natural setting and excellent hiking opportunities. Their recreational vehicle was positioned in the campground's most secluded spot, surrounded by ancient trees and offering complete privacy from the other camping families. The nearest occupied site was over 100 meters away, separated by dense undergrowth and natural forest barriers. During their first 2 days, the Pembertons had enjoyed perfect weather and peaceful surroundings, spending their time hiking forest trails and exploring nearby streams. On the night of October 18th, just after midnight, the family was awakened by heavy, deliberate knocking sounds coming from multiple directions around their vehicle. The knocking was not random or chaotic, but seemed to follow a methodical pattern, as if something was systematically testing different sections of their camper. Bartholomew initially assumed the sounds were caused by raccoons or other small animals investigating their campsite, but the intensity and rhythm of the impacts suggested something much larger. As the family listened from inside their vehicle, they became aware of heavy footsteps circling their campsite with measured, purposeful movements. The footfalls were distinctly different from any wildlife they had encountered during their years of camping. Each step seemed to involve considerable weight and created a slight vibration that could be felt through the vehicle's floor. Most unsettling was the complete silence between footsteps, as if whatever was moving around their campsite possessed an unnatural ability to move quietly despite its apparent size. Cordelia managed to peer through one of the small camper windows and caught a glimpse of an enormous shadow moving between the trees just beyond the reach of their exterior floodlights. The silhouette appeared to be walking upright, with a stride that was far too long for any human, and its height seemed to exceed anything she had ever encountered in nature. The figure moved with fluid grace despite its massive proportions, disappearing and reappearing between the forest giants that surrounded their campsite. The mysterious presence maintained its vigil around their vehicle for nearly 3 hours, occasionally returning to knock on different sections of the camper's exterior walls. The family huddled together inside, afraid to venture outside or even turn on additional lights that might attract further attention. Their faithful German shepherd, Wilhelm, who normally barked at the slightest disturbance, remained completely silent throughout the entire encounter, cowering beneath the dining table with every sign of terror. When dawn finally broke over the forest canopy, the Pembertons cautiously emerged from their vehicle to assess any damage to their campsite. What they discovered left them deeply disturbed and questioning everything they thought they knew about the wildlife inhabiting these ancient forests. Several of their neighboring campers' tents had been methodically shredded during the night, with long tiers that appeared to have been made by claws of enormous proportions. Coolers had been overturned and their contents scattered, but interestingly, no food had been consumed or carried away. Most shocking were the claw marks they found gouged deeply into wooden fence posts and tree trunks throughout the campground. The scratches extended nearly 4 meters above ground level, far higher than any known bear species could reach. The marks themselves were broader and deeper than typical bear claws, with a spacing between individual scratches that suggested digits of unprecedented size. Park rangers arrived later that morning to investigate the disturbances and discovered enormous footprints pressed into the soft forest soil near several campsites. The prints measured approximately 50 centimeters in length and showed clear impressions of individual toes, but their size and shape matched no animal species known to inhabit the Oregon forests. The footprints formed clear trails that led from the campground deep into the surrounding wilderness, following paths that would be impossible for humans to navigate in darkness. Most tragically, the Pemberton family's beloved German shepherd had vanished without a trace during the night's events. Despite extensive searching of the surrounding forest and appeals to other campers, Wilhelm was never found. The dog's disappearance was particularly puzzling because he had shown no inclination to wander from the campsite during their previous days at the location, and his terrorized behavior during the night suggested he would have been unlikely to voluntarily leave the safety of the vehicle. Official reports attributed the incident to an unusually aggressive bear, possibly driven to desperate behavior by the approaching winter season and scarce food sources. Rangers recommended that all campers store food in bear-proof containers and avoid camping in the area during late autumn months, when wildlife behavior could become unpredictable. However, the Pemberton family remained convinced that their encounter involved something far more mysterious than a conventional bear. Bartholomew later reported that the creature's movements had demonstrated a level of intelligence and deliberate behavior that was inconsistent with typical animal responses. The methodical nature of the investigation of their campsite, combined with the enormous physical evidence left behind, suggested an encounter with something that current wildlife science could not adequately explain. The family never returned to camping in Oregon's coastal forests, and their experience was shared quietly among other outdoor enthusiasts who reported similar encounters in remote locations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Local residents began warning visitors about the importance of respecting the ancient forests and the powerful guardians that were said to watch over them, creatures that remained hidden in the deep wilderness, but occasionally revealed themselves to those who ventured too far into their domain. The Cascade Mountains of Central Oregon contain numerous unexplored cave systems that had fascinated spelunkers and adventure seekers for generations. On May 9, 2018, a particular cave network located approximately 70 kilometers southeast of Bend had gained attention among experienced cavers for its complex tunnel systems and unique geological formations. The cave entrance was situated in a remote forest valley, accessible only by a challenging 3-hour hike through dense wilderness that had deterred casual explorers and maintained the site's pristine condition. A group of 4 experienced cavers had planned their expedition to explore these uncharted passages for several months. The team consisted of Algernon Weatherby, a geology professor with over 20 years of cave exploration experience, Octavius Blackthorne, a professional cave rescue specialist, Phineas Grimthorne, an adventure photographer documenting unexplored cave systems, and Cornelius Darkwater, a retired mining engineer with extensive underground navigation skills. All 4 men possessed advanced technical climbing abilities and carried specialized equipment for safe cave exploration. Their expedition began at dawn on a clear May morning, with perfect weather conditions for the challenging hike to the cave entrance. The team carried enough supplies for a full day of exploration, including multiple light sources, emergency communication equipment, and detailed mapping tools to document any significant discoveries. The cave entrance was impressive, a jagged opening approximately 4 meters wide that descended sharply into complete darkness, with cool air flowing steadily from the depths below. The initial passages were relatively straightforward, consisting of wide tunnels with stable rock formations that posed minimal technical challenges. As the team penetrated deeper into the mountain, the passages became increasingly narrow and complex, requiring careful navigation and constant attention to their route to ensure safe return to the surface. The cave walls displayed fascinating mineral formations and geological features that provided valuable scientific insights into the region's volcanic history. After approximately 2 hours of steady progress through interconnected chambers and tunnels, the team encountered something that fundamentally altered the nature of their expedition. While navigating a particularly narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber, they began hearing heavy footsteps echoing from deeper within the cave system. The sounds were distinctly different from the normal acoustics of underground water dripping or rock settling. These were deliberate, measured footfalls that suggested the presence of something large moving through the darkness ahead. Octavius Blackthorne, drawing upon his extensive experience in cave rescue operations, immediately signaled for complete silence while the team attempted to identify the source of the sounds. The footsteps continued for several minutes, accompanied by deep, rhythmic breathing that reverberated through the stone corridors with an almost mechanical regularity. The breathing sounds were far too deep and powerful to originate from any known cave-dwelling animal species. As the team cautiously advanced toward the sounds, Phineas Grimthorne managed to catch a glimpse of an enormous dark silhouette standing motionless against a jagged rock wall in a chamber approximately 30 meters ahead. The figure appeared to be upright and humanoid in basic shape, but its proportions exceeded anything within normal human parameters. Most disturbing was the creature's complete stillness. It remained frozen like a statue for several minutes, before suddenly vanishing into the deeper recesses of the cave system. The team attempted to follow the creature's path, but discovered that it had somehow accessed passages that appeared too narrow for something of its apparent size. Despite thorough exploration of the surrounding chambers, they found no evidence of where the figure had gone or how it had navigated the complex tunnel network in complete darkness. The acoustic properties of the cave system made it impossible to determine the direction of any continuing movement. When the team finally emerged from the cave system several hours later, they discovered physical evidence that supported their underground encounter. The cave entrance bore fresh claw marks gouged deeply into the rock wall, extending nearly 4 meters above the cave floor. The scratches were far too high and large to have been made by any known animal species that inhabited the Oregon wilderness. The marks appeared to have been made recently, as small fragments of rock debris were still scattered on the ground below. Near the cave entrance, partially obscured by fallen leaves and forest debris, the team discovered enormous footprints pressed into patches of soft earth. The prints measured approximately 48 centimeters in length and showed clear impressions of individual toes, but their size and depth suggested something of extraordinary weight and proportions. The footprints formed a clear trail leading from the cave entrance deeper into the surrounding forest, following paths that would be challenging for humans to navigate even in daylight. When the team reported their experience to local forest rangers, officials suggested that the sounds and sightings were likely the result of bears using the cave system for shelter, combined with the acoustic distortion common in underground environment. Rangers explained that bear behavior could seem unusual in cave settings, and that the darkness and echoing sound could create misleading impressions of size and movement patterns. However, all 4 team members firmly disagreed with this assessment, insisting that what they had encountered was far larger and more intelligent than any bear species. Algernon Weatherby noted that the creature's movement had demonstrated a familiarity with the cave system that suggested long-term habitation, while Octavius Blackthorne emphasized that the breathing patterns they had heard were unlike anything in his extensive experience with cave-dwelling wildlife. The team's photographic documentation of the claw marks and footprint was submitted to various wildlife experts, but no definitive identification of the creature responsible was ever established. Several cryptozoology enthusiasts expressed interest in the evidence, but mainstream scientific opinion remained skeptical of the team's conclusion. Local residents in the area began sharing additional stories about strange occurrences near the cave system, including unexplained sounds during evening hours and the discovery of large footprints following heavy rainfall. Several experienced hikers reported feeling watched while passing near the cave entrance, and some mentioned hearing deep vocalizations echoing from within the mountain during quiet night. The 4 cavers never returned to explore that particular cave system, despite their extensive experience and professional interest in underground exploration. They privately maintained that something ancient and intelligent inhabited those dark passages, something that had observed human intrusion into its domain and demonstrated both the physical capability and territorial awareness to defend its underground realm from further disturbance. The remote wilderness of northern Norway contained countless pristine lakes nestled within ancient forests that had remained largely untouched by modern civilization. On August 27, 2016, a particular lake system located deep within the Bergefjell region offered some of Europe's most challenging and rewarding wilderness canoeing experiences. This unnamed lake, situated approximately 120 kilometers northeast of Mosjøen, stretched nearly 8 kilometers in length and was surrounded by dense boreal forests of spruce, pine, and birch that had grown undisturbed for centuries. 3 experienced wilderness canoeists had planned an ambitious expedition to explore this remote lake system and document its pristine natural beauty. The team consisted of Thorvald Grimfjord, a professional wilderness guide with 15 years of experience leading expeditions throughout Scandinavia, Bjørn Ironwood, a nature photographer specializing in remote wilderness locations, and Magnus Stormwind, a marine biologist studying pristine lake ecosystems. All 3 men possessed extensive canoeing skill and had successfully completed numerous challenging wilderness expeditions throughout northern Europe. Their journey to the remote lake required 2 days of hiking through roadless wilderness, carrying their lightweight canoe and essential supplies across challenging terrain that included steep mountain passes and dense forest sections. The lake itself was breathtakingly beautiful, with crystal clear water that reflected the surrounding mountains and forests like a perfect mirror. Ancient pines grew directly from rocky shorelines, their massive trunk bearing witness to centuries of undisturbed growth. The 3 men established their base camp on a small peninsula that jutted into the lake's southern section, providing excellent access to fishing areas and panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness. Their campsite was positioned beneath towering evergreen that offered natural shelter, while maintaining clear sightlines across the water's surface. During their first 2 days, the expedition proceeded flawlessly, with excellent weather conditions and abundant opportunities for photography and scientific observation. On the evening of August 29th, the team decided to paddle to the lake's northern shore to investigate interesting geological formations that Bjørn had spotted through his telephoto camera lens. The water was perfectly calm, creating ideal conditions for evening canoeing and photography. They departed their camp approximately 2 hours before sunset, planning to return before complete darkness settled over the forest. As their canoe approached the northern shoreline, all 3 men began noticing unusual signs of animal activity along the water's edge. Large sections of shoreline vegetation had been disturbed, with broken branches and trampled undergrowth, suggesting the presence of something significantly larger than the typical moose or bear species known to inhabit the region. Most intriguing were massive depressions in the muddy bank that appeared to be footprints of extraordinary size and depth. Thorvald Grimfjord, drawing upon his extensive experience reading wilderness signs, noted that the disturbances seemed too systematic and deliberate to result from normal animal foraging behavior. The patterns suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random wildlife activity. Magnus Stormwind observed that the lake's usual population of waterfowl and small mammals seemed unusually quiet and absent from areas where the mysterious disturbances were most pronounced. As the team investigated the shoreline more closely, they discovered enormous claw marks gouged deeply into the bark of several mature pine trees. The scratches extended nearly 4 meters above the ground, far higher than any known animal in the region could reach. The marks were fresh, with sap still oozing from the deepest gouges, suggesting that whatever had made them had been active very recently. The three men were so engrossed in documenting these mysterious findings that they failed to notice the approach of complete darkness until navigation became challenging. As they prepared to return to their camp across the now black water, they heard deep, resonant vocalizations echoing from the dense forest behind them. The sounds were unlike anything in their combined experience, not quite human, yet possessing an intelligence and intentionality that distinguished them from typical animal call. Their canoe was discovered 3 days later by a Norwegian rescue team, drifting empty among the reeds at the lake's eastern shore. All of their equipment remained in the vessel, including cameras, scientific instruments, and emergency supply. But the three men had vanished without any trace. The canoe showed no signs of damage or distress, and weather conditions had remained calm throughout the period of their disappearance. Extensive search and rescue operations involving helicopters, diving teams, and ground personnel covered the entire lake system and surrounding forest areas. Despite these comprehensive efforts, no trace of Thorvald Grimfjord, Björn Ironwood, or Magnus Stormwind was ever discovered. The lake's depth in the central areas exceeded 60 meters, and underwater searches revealed no evidence of the missing men. The most puzzling discovery was made by rescue teams investigating the northern shoreline where the men had last been seen. Enormous footprints were found pressed deeply into the muddy ground, forming clear trails that led from the water's edge deep into the surrounding forest. The prints measured nearly 50 centimeters in length and showed distinct impressions of individual toes, but their size and characteristic matched no animal species known to inhabit Norwegian wilderness areas. Forensic examination of the footprint revealed that they had been made by something of extraordinary weight, pressing deep impressions into ground that would barely register human footsteps. The stride length between prints suggested a creature with proportions far exceeding normal human parameters, yet the basic structure of the feet showed unmistakably humanoid characteristics. Official reports classified the incident as an accidental drowning, suggesting that the three men may have capsized in darkness and been unable to swim to safety in the cold water. However, the pristine condition of their canoe and the complete absence of any personal belongings in the water raised questions about this explanation among family members and fellow wilderness enthusiasts. Local Sami elders, when informed about the incident, expressed little surprise at the outcome. They explained that the lake had long been considered sacred territory, protected by ancient guardians who tolerated limited human presence, but responded decisively to perceived threat or disrespect. The elders noted that the missing men had been documenting and photographing areas that were traditionally considered forbidden to outsiders. The Norwegian authorities eventually closed the case due to lack of evidence, but the mysterious footprints and claw marks discovered at the scene continued to attract attention from researchers interested in unexplained phenomena. The lake was quietly removed from official wilderness recreation map, and local guides began discouraging visitors from attempting to access the remote location. The three men's families maintained that something extraordinary had occurred at that remote Norwegian lake, something that conventional explanations could not adequately address. Their conviction was strengthened later on by the discovery of Magnus Stormwind's waterproof research journal, found months later hanging from a tree branch 4 kilometers from the lake at an impossible height above ground level.